Today, we're taking a closer look at Creed 3. We'll talk about its story, performances, direction, action, music, some interesting behind-the-scenes facts, its box office performance, and whether it truly lives up to the legacy of the Creed and Rocky franchise. So, let's get started. When people hear the name Creed 3, the first thing that usually comes to mind is boxing. That's understandable because the franchise was built on the legacy of Rocky and has always delivered exciting fights inside the ring. But after watching this movie, it becomes clear that the real battle isn't about winning a championship. It's about dealing with guilt that has been buried for years, friendships that were destroyed by time, and the weight of success that can quietly change a person's life without them even realizing it. That's what makes Creed 3 different from many modern sports dramas. It isn't trying to copy the emotional journey of the earlier Rocky movies. Instead, it chooses to tell a much more personal story centered entirely around Adonis Creed and the choices that shaped the man he has become. One of the biggest reasons this movie immediately stands out is because it marks the directorial debut of Michael B. Jordan. Taking on the responsibility of leading a major franchise while also starring in it is not an easy task. Many actors have tried directing before, but very few choose a project this large for their first attempt. What makes Jordan's work impressive isn't that he completely changes the formula. Instead, he understands what fans love about this series and slowly adds his own personality without losing the heart of the franchise. You can tell throughout the film that someone deeply connected to Adonis Creed was guiding every emotional moment. The camera often stays focused on expressions instead of rushing toward action, allowing conversations and silence to carry as much weight as the punches themselves. That confidence is something first-time directors don't always have. This is also the first film in the Rocky universe without Sylvester Stallone appearing on screen. For many longtime fans, that sounded risky before release. Rocky Balboa has been the emotional backbone of this universe for nearly 50 years, so removing him could easily have left a huge gap. Surprisingly, the movie doesn't spend time trying to explain his absence in dramatic ways. It simply accepts that Adonis has reached a stage where he has to face his problems alone. In many ways, that's exactly what growing up looks like. Mentors eventually step aside, and the student has to carry everything without someone standing in the corner giving advice. Rather than making audiences miss Rocky every few minutes, the story quietly proves that Adonis is finally capable of carrying the franchise on his own shoulders. What also deserves appreciation is how confidently the screenplay introduces its central conflict. Instead of relying on another title fight or another underdog story, it explores the consequences of a single decision made many years earlier. Everyone has moments from their past they wish they could change. Some mistakes disappear with time, while others quietly follow people for decades. Creed 3 builds its emotional foundation around that universal feeling. Even viewers who don't care much about boxing can understand the fear of facing someone connected to a painful memory. That's one of the smartest writing decisions in the entire film because it gives the conflict emotional weight long before anyone throws a punch. Jonathan Majors deserves immediate recognition for what he brings to the movie as Damian Anderson. Before audiences even understand everything about his character, there's an uncomfortable feeling whenever he appears. He doesn't act like a traditional movie villain who's constantly angry or shouting. Instead, he carries himself with a quiet confidence that slowly becomes more unsettling the longer he stays on screen. His body language, eye contact, and calm delivery make Damian feel unpredictable. That unpredictability creates tension in almost every conversation. You never know whether he's genuinely happy for Adonis or secretly carrying years of resentment beneath the surface. It's a performance built on restraint rather than loud emotions, and that makes it far more interesting. Michael B. Jordan also delivers one of his strongest performances as Adonis Creed. By this point in the franchise, Adonis isn't chasing fame anymore. He's already achieved almost everything a boxer dreams about. He's wealthy, respected, and living comfortably with his family. Playing a successful character is sometimes harder than playing someone struggling because success can remove obvious sources of conflict. Jordan solves that problem by showing that external success doesn't automatically erase internal guilt. Even when Adonis smiles, there's often a slight hesitation that hints something isn't completely settled inside him. Those small details make the character feel older, wiser, and much more believable than simply presenting another undefeated champion. Another strength that becomes noticeable early is how naturally the movie balances family life with the world of professional boxing. Earlier sports movies often focused almost entirely on training montages and championship matches. Here, family carries equal importance. Adonis isn't just an athlete anymore. He's a husband, a father, and someone trying to build a stable future outside the ring. His relationship with Bianca continues to feel genuine because it doesn't rely on unnecessary drama. Tessa Thompson once again gives Bianca warmth, intelligence, and emotional maturity. Their conversations feel like real discussions between two people who have spent years together rather than scenes written simply to move the plot forward. The production quality also deserves praise. Warner Brothers and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer clearly invested heavily in making the movie look polished without making it feel overly flashy. The reported production budget was around $75 million, and most of that investment appears on screen through strong production design, convincing boxing arenas, detailed training environments, and high-quality cinematography rather than excessive visual effects. The film understands that realism matters more than spectacle. Even when the camera becomes more creative during boxing sequences, it never loses sight of the emotional reality driving every fight. Visually, the movie has a slightly different personality compared to earlier entries. Cinematographer Kramer Morgenthau gives many scenes richer shadows and stronger contrasts, creating an atmosphere that feels more intimate than grand. Instead of making every frame look glamorous, the visuals often reflect the emotional pressure each character carries. Michael B. Jordan has openly spoken about drawing inspiration from Japanese anime while designing certain fight sequences, and although those influences are subtle, they add a fresh visual identity without making the movie feel unrealistic. It's an unusual combination that ends up working surprisingly well because it emphasizes emotion rather than simply showing physical violence. Before release, many people wondered whether Creed 3 could succeed without Rocky or whether audiences had grown tired of boxing dramas altogether. Those concerns disappeared quickly after the film reached theaters. It opened to strong reviews from critics, earned praise for Michael B. Jordan's confident direction, and became the highest-grossing film in the Creed series. Worldwide, it earned over $275 million, proving there was still a large audience willing to follow Adonis Creed's journey even as the franchise stepped into a completely new era. That commercial success wasn't based only on nostalgia. It came because viewers connected with the emotional honesty at the center of the story. Perhaps the most impressive achievement of Creed 3 is that it doesn't feel trapped by the legacy of the films before it. Respect for Rocky is always present, but the movie refuses to depend on that history for every emotional moment. Instead, it begins asking whether Adonis can define himself without constantly looking backward. That's a difficult question for both the character and the franchise, and the confidence with which the film begins exploring it immediately gives the audience a reason to stay invested. It isn't simply another boxing sequel. It's the beginning of a new chapter where legacy matters, but identity matters even more. One of the biggest reasons Creed 3 works as well as it does is because it understands that every memorable sports movie needs more than an opponent. It needs someone who forces the main character to question who they are. Winning a championship is exciting, but emotional conflict is what people remember years later. Damian Anderson isn't introduced as someone the audience should immediately hate. In fact, during his first few scenes, it's easy to understand why Adonis welcomes him back into his life. They share history, memories, and dreams that existed long before fame, money, or championship belts entered the picture. Watching two people reconnect after years apart naturally creates hope that maybe they can rebuild what was lost. That's exactly why the screenplay becomes so effective. Instead of rushing into hostility, it allows trust to slowly develop before cracks begin appearing underneath the surface. The relationship between Adonis and Damian feels believable because neither character is completely right or completely wrong. Life rarely creates situations where one person carries all the blame, and the writers seem to understand that. Adonis has built an incredible life through discipline, hard work, and opportunities that eventually came his way. Damian, on the other hand, lost years that he can never recover. Those missing years become part of his identity. When someone watches the world continue moving without them, resentment can quietly replace hope. The film never asks the audience to excuse Damian's actions, but it does encourage viewers to understand where that anger comes from. That balance gives the story much more emotional depth than a simple hero versus villain formula. Jonathan Majors deserves even more credit the longer the movie goes on. His performance isn't built around explosive speeches or exaggerated expressions. Instead, he constantly makes Damian feel like someone carrying invisible emotional scars. Even while smiling, there's often a feeling that something darker is hiding underneath. His physical transformation also deserves recognition. Majors trained extensively for the role, developing the body language of someone who had spent years preparing for an opportunity that might never come. Every movement inside the ring feels controlled and deliberate. Outside the ring, he often walks with the confidence of someone trying to convince himself that he still belongs among champions. Those small performance choices make Damian one of the most memorable opponents in the entire Rocky and Creed universe. Michael B. Jordan matches that intensity by giving Adonis a quieter emotional performance than audiences may have expected. Earlier films often focused on proving himself as a boxer. Here, his biggest challenge isn't physical strength. It's emotional honesty. Success has allowed Adonis to hide from certain parts of his past because there was always another fight, another business decision, or another responsibility demanding attention. Damian's return removes that comfort. Suddenly, memories that had remained buried for years become impossible to ignore. Jordan communicates that pressure without constantly explaining it through dialogue. His expressions often say more than the script itself. That's one of the advantages of having an actor direct himself. He clearly understands when silence can carry more weight than another conversation. The screenplay also deserves praise for avoiding unnecessary melodrama. A lesser movie might have filled every interaction with shouting matches and emotional breakdowns. Instead, many of the strongest scenes remain surprisingly restrained. Characters often choose their words carefully because they're carrying years of history together. That restraint makes emotional explosions much more effective whenever they finally happen. It also allows the audience to imagine everything left unsaid between these people. Sometimes the most powerful storytelling comes from what characters refuse to admit rather than what they openly confess. Another impressive aspect is how naturally the movie explores success and its hidden consequences. Sports films often celebrate becoming a champion as though life becomes perfect afterward. Creed 3 takes a much more realistic approach. Adonis has everything he once dreamed about. He owns a successful gym, enjoys financial security, has a loving family, and is respected throughout the boxing world. Yet none of those achievements erase old guilt. That's an important message because real life often works the same way. Personal success doesn't automatically heal emotional wounds. Some problems simply wait quietly until something forces them back into the open. Bianca continues to play an important role in keeping the emotional side of the story grounded. Tessa Thompson once again brings sincerity to the character without demanding unnecessary attention. Bianca isn't written as someone who simply supports every decision Adonis makes. She challenges him whenever necessary while still understanding the emotional burden he's carrying. Their relationship feels mature because disagreements don't immediately become dramatic arguments. Instead, they communicate like two adults trying to protect both their family and each other. That realism makes their marriage one of the stronger relationships currently seen in major Hollywood franchises. Their daughter Amara also adds another layer to the film without becoming a distraction. Casting Mila Davis-Kent, who is deaf in real life, gives the family dynamic additional authenticity. Rather than treating Amara's hearing loss as something tragic, the movie presents it as simply one part of who she is. Sign language becomes a natural part of everyday conversations inside their home, and those moments help make the Creed family feel genuine. It's a thoughtful decision that adds representation while avoiding the feeling that the film is trying too hard to make a statement. The technical side of the production continues supporting the emotional storytelling. One detail that often goes unnoticed is the editing. Editors Tyler Nelson and Jessica Backless avoid cutting scenes too quickly during important conversations. Instead of constantly switching camera angles, they allow performances to breathe. This slower rhythm gives actors room to communicate through facial expressions and body language. Then, whenever boxing enters the picture, the editing becomes sharper and more energetic without turning into the confusing style found in some modern action movies. The audience always understands where fighters are standing, which punch lands, and how momentum shifts throughout each exchange. Music also deserves appreciation because it knows when to stay in the background. Composers Joseph Shirley and others involved in the score avoid overwhelming emotional moments with loud orchestral music. Instead, the soundtrack quietly supports the mood already created by performances and cinematography. During training sequences, the music naturally builds motivation without trying to recreate the iconic Rocky themes too often. That restraint allows Creed 3 to establish its own musical identity while still respecting the franchise's history. One interesting production fact is that Michael B. Jordan repeatedly mentioned drawing inspiration from anime series like Naruto and Dragon Ball Z while designing certain emotional beats and fight choreography. That may sound surprising at first, but after watching the movie carefully, those influences become easier to notice. Certain close-ups, moments of silence before impact, and emotional confrontations inside the ring carry a dramatic intensity similar to anime storytelling. Instead of feeling out of place, those ideas give the boxing scenes a fresh energy that separates Creed 3 from earlier entries. Critics also noticed this willingness to experiment. While reviews weren't universally perfect, many praised Jordan's confidence behind the camera and highlighted Jonathan Majors' performance as one of the strongest parts of the film. Audiences responded positively as well, appreciating that the movie focused on emotional conflict instead of simply trying to deliver bigger fights. That balance between character drama and sports entertainment is difficult to achieve, but Creed 3 manages it surprisingly well. By the time this stage of the film settles in, it becomes clear that the biggest contest isn't about championship belts or rankings. It's about whether two men shaped by the same past can ever truly escape it. That emotional foundation gives every future confrontation genuine meaning because the audience understands that victory alone won't erase years of regret, disappointment, or resentment. In many ways, those emotional wounds become the real opponent both characters must face. One thing that becomes more impressive the longer you think about Creed 3 is how much confidence Michael B. Jordan shows as a first-time director. Plenty of actors have stepped behind the camera before, but directing a major studio franchise is an entirely different challenge. There are expectations from longtime fans, pressure from the studio, and constant comparisons to previous films. Instead of playing it completely safe, Jordan makes several creative choices that give this movie its own personality. He respects everything that came before it, but he never allows the film to become trapped by nostalgia. That balance is much harder to achieve than it looks, and it's one of the main reasons the movie feels fresh instead of repetitive. The visual storytelling is probably where Jordan's influence is felt the most. Many sports dramas rely on fast editing, loud music, and dramatic speeches to create excitement. Creed 3 certainly has those exciting moments, but it often chooses something quieter. There are several scenes where the camera simply stays on a character's face, allowing the audience to read emotions without anyone explaining what they're feeling. Those moments require confidence because they ask viewers to pay attention instead of constantly chasing action. Fortunately, the cast is talented enough to make those silent moments just as engaging as the boxing matches themselves. Cinematographer Kramer Morgenthau also deserves enormous credit for helping bring Jordan's vision to life. The lighting throughout the movie feels warmer inside family scenes and much colder whenever Damian enters the picture. It's a subtle visual contrast, but it works remarkably well. Without saying a single word, the film quietly tells the audience when Adonis feels safe and when his past begins closing in around him. The framing also becomes more intimate than many previous boxing films. Close-up shots are used frequently, making emotional confrontations feel personal instead of theatrical. That style fits the story because this isn't really about saving a career or becoming famous. It's about confronting emotions that have remained buried for years. The boxing scenes themselves deserve special attention because they're filmed differently from what audiences might expect. Instead of trying to make every punch look as realistic as possible, Jordan focuses on how each fight feels emotionally. Some sequences even remove parts of the surrounding crowd, making it seem as though only the two fighters exist in that moment. It's an unusual artistic choice that won't work for everyone, but it reflects what's happening inside the characters' minds. During the biggest emotional moments, everything else disappears. The fight stops being about thousands of people watching and becomes something deeply personal between two men carrying decades of history. It's one of the boldest creative decisions in the entire movie. That willingness to experiment likely came from Jordan's love of Japanese animation. He has openly discussed being inspired by series like Naruto, Dragon Ball Z, and Hajime no Ippo. Those influences don't turn Creed 3 into an anime, but they do shape the emotional rhythm of certain fights. The pauses before punches, the intense eye contact, and the exaggerated feeling of psychological pressure all resemble techniques often used in anime storytelling. Rather than feeling distracting, those ideas actually give the boxing sequences their own identity. Fans who recognize those influences may appreciate them even more, while others simply experience them as visually creative filmmaking. Outside the ring, the production design quietly helps establish where Adonis is in life. Earlier Creed movies focused heavily on gyms, apartments, and struggling neighborhoods because Adonis was still trying to build his future. Here, his surroundings reflect years of success. His home is beautiful without feeling overly extravagant. His gym represents discipline and professionalism instead of desperation. Every location subtly reinforces that Adonis has achieved almost everything he once wanted. That visual success makes Damian's arrival even more uncomfortable because it threatens a life that finally seemed stable. Costume design also deserves more recognition than it usually receives. Adonis dresses like someone who has grown comfortable with success but hasn't forgotten where he came from. Damian's wardrobe tells a very different story. His clothes often feel practical and slightly outdated, reflecting someone whose life stopped moving forward for many years. These details aren't emphasized through dialogue, but they quietly communicate each character's different journey. Good costume design often works this way. The audience notices the feeling without consciously analyzing the clothing itself. Another area where Creed 3 succeeds is sound design. Boxing movies depend heavily on convincing audio because punches need to feel powerful without becoming cartoonish. Every impact inside the ring carries weight, but the sound team avoids making every hit unrealistically explosive. Just as important are the quieter moments. Background noise often fades during emotionally intense conversations, allowing viewers to focus completely on performances. That careful control of sound helps create intimacy throughout the film. It's one of those technical achievements people rarely discuss after leaving the theater, yet it has a huge influence on how scenes are experienced. The screenplay also continues avoiding easy emotional shortcuts. It would have been simple to present Adonis as a flawless hero whose only challenge is defeating a dangerous opponent. Instead, the writers allow him to make questionable decisions and carry genuine responsibility for parts of the conflict. That complexity makes him far more relatable. Real people often create problems through hesitation, fear, or poor judgment rather than outright bad intentions. Adonis isn't haunted because he's evil. He's haunted because he made choices years earlier that still affect other people's lives. That's a much more mature approach than many sports dramas are willing to take. Jonathan Majors continues stealing nearly every scene he appears in. What makes his performance especially effective is that Damian never feels like someone seeking simple revenge. Beneath his anger is disappointment, loneliness, and the painful belief that life forgot about him while everyone else moved on. Those emotions make him unpredictable because viewers can never fully decide whether to sympathize with him or fear what he might do next. Majors creates that uncertainty through remarkably controlled acting. He rarely raises his voice, yet his presence remains intimidating almost every time he appears on screen. It's also worth mentioning how much trust the film places in its audience. Modern blockbusters sometimes over-explain every emotion, repeating the same ideas through dialogue, music, and visual cues. Creed 3 often does the opposite. It leaves room for viewers to interpret certain expressions, pauses, and conversations on their own. That approach makes the experience more rewarding because audiences become active participants rather than passive observers. You're encouraged to think about what motivates each character instead of being handed every answer immediately. From a business perspective, the movie became another important success for the franchise. Released in March 2023, it opened significantly stronger than previous Creed films and eventually earned more than $275 million worldwide against a production budget of around $75 million. Those numbers demonstrated that audiences were willing to embrace a Rocky universe without Rocky himself appearing on screen. That's an impressive achievement considering how closely the franchise had been connected to Sylvester Stallone for nearly 5 decades. The strong box office also confirmed that Michael B. Jordan could carry the series both as its leading actor and as its director. Perhaps the most satisfying aspect of Creed 3 at this stage is that it refuses to rely solely on familiar formulas. The movie understands the traditions of sports dramas, but it constantly looks for small ways to evolve them. Whether it's through more personal storytelling, creative cinematography, emotionally driven fight choreography, or morally complex characters, the film keeps reminding the audience that this series is no longer trying to live in someone else's shadow. It has finally found enough confidence to stand on its own, and that confidence becomes one of the movie's greatest strengths. One of the smartest decisions Creed 3 makes is refusing to turn boxing into the only thing that matters. Plenty of sports movies make the mistake of believing audiences only care about training sessions, championships, and dramatic victories. Those elements are certainly important, but they don't mean much if the characters themselves don't feel real. This film spends a surprising amount of time exploring what life looks like after someone reaches the top. Adonis isn't struggling to become famous anymore. He already has respect, financial success, and a family that genuinely loves him. That changes the emotional stakes completely. Instead of asking whether he can become a champion, the movie asks whether success has actually brought him peace. The answer isn't nearly as simple as it first appears. One of the themes that quietly runs through the entire film is responsibility. Adonis has built an incredible life, but every achievement also brings new obligations. He's no longer responsible only for himself. He's responsible for Bianca, for Amara, for the young fighters training under his guidance, and even for the future of the sport itself. Those responsibilities make every decision feel heavier because one mistake can affect many lives instead of just his own. That's a level of maturity that separates Creed 3 from many earlier sports dramas, where the focus usually remains on individual ambition rather than the consequences of leadership. This idea becomes especially interesting when you look at Adonis as a mentor. Earlier in the franchise, he was always the student learning from someone else. Whether it was Rocky or experienced trainers around him, there was always someone offering advice. Now the roles have completely changed. Younger fighters look toward him for guidance, expecting him to have answers. The movie doesn't pretend that becoming successful automatically makes someone a perfect mentor. In fact, Adonis sometimes struggles with that responsibility because he's still carrying unresolved issues from his own past. That makes his leadership feel authentic rather than idealized. Wood Harris also deserves recognition for returning as Tony Little Duke Evers. His role isn't flashy, but he's one of those actors who quietly strengthens every scene he appears in. Duke understands Adonis well enough to recognize when something is wrong, even if nobody openly says it. Harris brings calm authority to the character, making him feel like someone who has spent decades inside the boxing world. Unlike stereotypical trainers who constantly shout instructions, Duke often speaks with patience and experience. His presence helps maintain a connection to the earlier Creed films while allowing the new story to move in its own direction. Another strength that deserves attention is the screenplay's handling of trust. Trust isn't something people usually think about while watching a boxing movie, yet it's one of the central ideas here. Every important relationship in the film depends on trust. Adonis and Bianca trust each other. Fighters trust their trainers. Friends trust one another with painful memories. Once that trust begins breaking apart, every conversation becomes more uncomfortable. The movie never has to rely on exaggerated drama because damaged trust already creates enough tension. That's one of the reasons the emotional conflicts feel so believable. They're based on everyday human experiences rather than unrealistic plot twists. Michael B. Jordan also deserves praise for understanding restraint as a director. Modern blockbusters often feel afraid of silence. There always has to be another joke, another explosion, or another emotional speech. Creed 3 occasionally does the opposite. Some of its strongest scenes simply allow characters to exist together without rushing to fill every second with dialogue. Those pauses give audiences time to process emotions naturally. It's a small directing decision, but it shows confidence. Jordan trusts both his actors and his audience enough to let quiet moments carry emotional weight. The choreography inside the ring also reflects each fighter's personality instead of making every boxing match feel the same. Adonis fights with the confidence of someone who has years of championship experience behind him. His movements are measured, controlled, and strategic. Damian, by comparison, brings an energy that feels raw and unpredictable. His style reflects someone who believes every opportunity could be his last. Those differences make the fights feel like conversations between two completely different worldviews rather than simply physical contests. Even viewers who don't understand boxing technique can sense that each punch carries emotional meaning beyond winning rounds. The editing team deserves another mention because of how effectively they control pacing. At nearly 2 hours long, the film could easily have felt stretched, especially since it spends considerable time outside the ring. Instead, scenes flow naturally into one another without feeling rushed. Emotional conversations are allowed enough breathing room to have impact, while training sequences avoid becoming repetitive. The editors clearly understood that audiences needed moments to reflect before the story increased its intensity again. That rhythm keeps the movie engaging without exhausting viewers. The soundtrack continues supporting that balance. Instead of trying to imitate the classic Rocky music every few minutes, composer Joseph Shirley creates a score that fits Adonis' own journey. There are moments where familiar musical influences can be felt, reminding longtime fans of the franchise's history, but the soundtrack mostly establishes its own identity. During emotional scenes, the music stays understated, allowing performances to remain the focus. During training and boxing sequences, it gradually builds energy without becoming overwhelming. It's another example of the film showing restraint instead of chasing constant spectacle. From a production standpoint, it's impressive how much practical work went into making the boxing scenes convincing. Michael B. Jordan and Jonathan Majors spent months training before filming began. Their preparation wasn't limited to building muscle. They worked extensively on footwork, defensive movements, stamina, and realistic boxing habits so that experienced fans of the sport would believe what they were watching. That dedication becomes obvious throughout the film. Neither actor looks like someone pretending to be a boxer. Their movements feel practiced, disciplined, and physically demanding, adding authenticity that computer effects could never create. Another interesting behind-the-scenes fact is that Jordan reportedly encouraged collaboration from the cast and crew throughout production rather than treating every scene as fixed. That openness allowed performances to feel more natural because actors weren't simply delivering lines exactly as written. Small adjustments during filming helped conversations sound closer to how real people actually speak. It's one of those invisible creative choices audiences rarely notice directly, but it contributes greatly to why the dialogue feels relaxed instead of scripted. Audience reactions after release reflected that authenticity. Many viewers praised the emotional relationship between Adonis and Damian even more than the boxing itself. Social media discussions frequently focused on the complicated friendship at the heart of the story, with many people debating whether either character was entirely right or wrong. That's usually a sign of thoughtful writing. Movies are often remembered longer when audiences continue discussing characters instead of simply remembering action scenes. Creed 3 succeeded in creating those conversations because it refused to offer easy answers. Critics also highlighted Michael B. Jordan's growth behind the camera. While some reviews pointed out that the overall story followed familiar sports drama foundations, many agreed that the direction gave those familiar ideas fresh emotional energy. Jonathan Majors' performance received particularly widespread praise, with numerous critics describing him as one of the film's biggest strengths. Even people who had minor issues with certain parts of the screenplay often agreed that the performances elevated the material considerably. It's clear that Creed 3 isn't trying to convince audiences that greatness comes from winning every fight. Instead, it quietly argues that true strength comes from facing parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. Championships may earn applause, but confronting regret, accepting responsibility, and choosing forgiveness require a completely different kind of courage. That's where the film begins separating itself from many others in the genre, proving that its most meaningful victories aren't measured by scorecards but by personal growth. A lot of modern franchise films fall into the trap of trying to be bigger than the previous installment. Bigger action scenes, bigger explosions, bigger villains, and higher stakes become the main selling points. Creed 3 takes a different path. Instead of constantly trying to outdo the earlier films in size, it focuses on making the conflict feel more personal. That decision ends up being one of the movie's greatest strengths because emotional investment almost always lasts longer than visual spectacle. Years from now, most people probably won't remember every punch that was thrown, but they'll remember why those punches mattered. The emotional center of the movie isn't really boxing at all. It's regret. Regret has a unique way of following people through life. You can become successful, wealthy, respected, and admired, yet one unresolved mistake from years ago can still occupy your thoughts. That's exactly what Creed 3 explores with surprising honesty. Adonis has everything he once dreamed about, but Damian's return reminds him that some chapters never truly close just because time has passed. The film treats regret almost like an invisible opponent, something that can't be knocked out or defeated through physical strength alone. That makes the story relatable even for viewers who have never watched a boxing match in their lives. One of the screenplay's strongest qualities is that it avoids creating obvious heroes and obvious villains. Damian certainly makes decisions that are difficult to defend, but the movie spends enough time explaining his perspective that audiences can understand why he became the person he is. Losing years of freedom changes someone forever. Watching another person achieve the dreams you once shared together naturally creates painful emotions. Jealousy, disappointment, loneliness, and anger become tangled together until it's difficult even for Damian himself to separate them. The film never asks viewers to excuse his actions, but it does ask them to recognize the emotional damage that shaped him. That complexity makes Jonathan Majors' performance even more impressive. He plays Damian with remarkable control. Instead of relying on dramatic outbursts, he often communicates through tiny facial expressions, quiet smiles, and moments of uncomfortable silence. There are scenes where he says very little, yet it's impossible to ignore him because his body language constantly suggests that he's thinking several steps ahead. His physical presence certainly helps, but it's the emotional restraint that leaves the strongest impression. Many movie antagonists try to dominate scenes through loud personalities. Damian dominates them through unpredictability. You never feel completely certain what he's going to do next, and that uncertainty creates tension almost automatically. Michael B. Jordan deserves equal praise because his performance moves in the opposite direction. Adonis isn't trying to intimidate anyone. He's trying to protect the life he has built. Jordan understands that internal conflict often produces quieter performances. Rather than delivering emotional speeches every few minutes, he allows uncertainty to appear naturally through hesitation, eye contact, and subtle reactions. There are moments where Adonis seems completely confident on the outside while clearly struggling internally. Those contradictions make him feel like a real person instead of a typical movie champion. Another aspect that deserves recognition is the relationship between Adonis and Bianca. Hollywood often struggles to write believable married couples because scripts tend to rely on unnecessary arguments simply to create drama. Creed 3 avoids that trap for the most part. Bianca and Adonis don't always agree, but their disagreements come from genuine concern rather than artificial conflict. Tessa Thompson gives Bianca enough independence that she never feels like she's existing only to support the main character. She has her own opinions, her own career, and her own emotional intelligence. Whenever Adonis begins making questionable decisions, Bianca isn't afraid to challenge him, but she does so with understanding rather than hostility. Their relationship feels mature, which is surprisingly rare in major franchise films. Amara continues adding warmth to the story as well. The film never treats her as simply a cute child included to make audiences emotional. Instead, she becomes another reminder of what Adonis stands to lose if he allows old mistakes to control his future. Her scenes with Bianca and Adonis feel relaxed and natural, helping balance the heavier emotional material found elsewhere in the movie. Casting Mila Davis-Kent also adds an authentic quality that makes the family dynamic even more believable. Small details like everyday conversations in sign language quietly strengthen the realism of the Creed household. One technical achievement that deserves far more attention is the production design. Every location feels carefully chosen to reflect the emotional state of the characters. Adonis' home communicates comfort, stability, and years of success without appearing excessive. The gym remains grounded and practical, reminding viewers that boxing is still built on discipline rather than luxury. Even the arenas feel different depending on the emotional importance of each fight. None of these visual choices demand attention, but together they create a world that feels lived in instead of manufactured. The costume department deserves praise for similar reasons. Clothing quietly reflects each character's personality throughout the film. Adonis dresses like someone who has become comfortable with success but hasn't forgotten his roots. Bianca's wardrobe reflects confidence and professionalism without trying to overpower her personality. Damian's appearance, meanwhile, often carries a rougher edge, reinforcing the feeling that life forced him down a much harsher path. These details work because they never feel exaggerated. They simply support what the performances are already communicating. Another interesting production fact is that Michael B. Jordan was heavily involved in planning the training sequences long before cameras started rolling. He wanted each workout to reveal something about the characters instead of simply showing impressive physical fitness. That's why the training never feels like a collection of random exercises. Every sequence reflects the emotional state of the fighter performing it. The physical preparation becomes another form of storytelling rather than just visual entertainment. It's a subtle difference, but it gives the movie much stronger emotional momentum. The visual effects are also used with restraint, which deserves appreciation. Unlike many modern blockbusters that depend heavily on computer-generated imagery, Creed 3 keeps its CGI almost invisible. Most viewers probably won't even notice where visual effects are being used, and that's often the best compliment possible. The technology exists mainly to enhance realism rather than replace it. Practical sets, real boxing choreography, and authentic physical performances remain the foundation of the experience, making the world feel tangible throughout. The film's commercial success also says something interesting about audiences today. Released in a market crowded with superhero movies, action spectacles, and long-running franchises, Creed 3 still managed to become a major box office hit. Earning more than $275 million worldwide on a production budget of approximately $75 million proved that viewers still have an appetite for character-driven storytelling when it's done well. It also became the highest-grossing movie in the Rocky and Creed franchise at the time, an achievement that many people weren't expecting before release. Perhaps the most satisfying thing about Creed 3 is that it respects the intelligence of its audience. It doesn't constantly explain every emotion or force every theme into dialogue. Instead, it trusts viewers to notice the small details, connect emotional moments, and understand that some of life's hardest battles happen long before anyone steps into a boxing ring. That's what gives the movie lasting value. Beneath the gloves, the championships, and the competition is a story about confronting the past without allowing it to define the future. That message feels honest, grounded, and surprisingly universal, which is why the film continues to resonate long after the final bell rings. One of the most interesting things about Creed 3 is that it asks a question many sports movies completely ignore. What happens after the dream comes true? Most boxing films end the moment the hero wins the biggest fight because that's usually the emotional payoff audiences expect. This movie begins from the opposite direction. Adonis has already climbed the mountain. He's already earned championship belts, financial security, and worldwide respect. The real challenge now is protecting everything he has built while dealing with problems that money and success simply cannot solve. That shift in perspective gives the film a level of maturity that separates it from many others in the genre. Success changes people, but not always in obvious ways. The movie quietly explores how becoming successful can also create distance between who someone is today and who they used to be. Adonis hasn't intentionally forgotten his past, yet it's clear that years of achievement have allowed certain memories to stay buried. Damian's return forces those memories back into his life all at once. It's uncomfortable because Adonis realizes that moving forward doesn't necessarily mean leaving everything behind. Sometimes the past waits patiently until the moment you're least prepared to face it. That's a theme that feels surprisingly realistic because almost everyone carries experiences they'd rather not revisit. The screenplay deserves credit for treating that emotional conflict with patience. Instead of turning every interaction into a dramatic confrontation, the writers understand that unresolved emotions usually build slowly. There are conversations where very little actually happens on the surface, but beneath the dialogue there's constant tension. Every pause, every glance, and every carefully chosen word suggests that both men are thinking about things they aren't ready to say out loud. That kind of writing demands strong performances because actors have to communicate emotions beyond the dialogue itself. Fortunately, both Michael B. Jordan and Jonathan Majors are more than capable of carrying that responsibility. Jordan's performance continues to impress because he never allows Adonis to become emotionally predictable. Some scenes show complete confidence, while others quietly reveal uncertainty that even Adonis himself struggles to understand. One moment he's making decisions like a successful businessman, and the next he's reacting like someone who never fully escaped his younger years. Those emotional contradictions make the character feel authentic. Real people rarely respond to complicated situations in perfectly logical ways, especially when old guilt becomes involved. Jordan captures that emotional confusion without ever making the character frustrating to watch. Jonathan Majors continues delivering one of the strongest performances of his career. What stands out most isn't simply his physical transformation, although that certainly deserves recognition. It's the emotional loneliness he brings to Damian. Beneath all the confidence and determination is someone desperately trying to convince himself that his life still has meaning. Every conversation carries the feeling that he's measuring himself against everything Adonis has achieved. That comparison becomes emotionally exhausting, and Majors communicates it brilliantly through subtle expressions instead of dramatic speeches. It's a performance built on emotional restraint, and that restraint makes every intense moment far more powerful. Another area where the movie deserves praise is how naturally it explores masculinity without constantly talking about it. Many films reduce strength to physical power, but Creed 3 suggests that real strength often comes from emotional honesty. Adonis spends much of the story trying to protect the people around him, yet he also struggles to admit his own fears and regrets. Damian has incredible physical ability, but years of emotional pain continue shaping his decisions. Neither man is emotionally complete, and that's exactly what makes them interesting. The movie quietly argues that confronting personal truth requires far more courage than simply throwing punches inside a boxing ring. Bianca plays an important role in reinforcing that idea. Tessa Thompson once again gives the character remarkable emotional intelligence. Rather than existing simply to comfort Adonis whenever problems appear, Bianca challenges him to confront realities he's trying to avoid. She understands that pretending difficult emotions don't exist only allows them to grow stronger over time. Their conversations never feel forced because they're written like discussions between two people who genuinely know each other. There's respect, patience, occasional disagreement, and mutual understanding. Those qualities make their marriage feel believable instead of idealized. The film also deserves appreciation for continuing Bianca's own journey instead of pushing it into the background. Earlier entries explored her hearing loss and music career, and Creed 3 continues acknowledging those parts of her life without allowing them to define her entire character. She's presented as a complete person with ambitions, concerns, and responsibilities of her own. That balanced approach strengthens the family dynamic because every member of the household feels like an individual rather than simply supporting Adonis' storyline. From a filmmaking perspective, the editing remains consistently impressive. The editors clearly understand when scenes need energy and when they need patience. Boxing sequences are fast enough to feel exciting without becoming visually confusing. Emotional conversations are allowed to breathe naturally, giving performances room to have impact. Modern action films sometimes mistake rapid editing for excitement, but Creed 3 proves that clarity often creates much stronger engagement. Audiences always understand the physical geography of the fights while remaining emotionally connected to what's happening. The cinematography continues supporting that balance beautifully. Kramer Morgenthau often uses lighting to reflect emotional states rather than simply making scenes look attractive. Family moments feel warm and inviting, while confrontations often carry sharper contrasts and cooler tones. Those visual decisions aren't distracting because they're integrated naturally into the storytelling. Good cinematography rarely calls attention to itself. Instead, it quietly shapes how audiences experience each moment without them consciously noticing why certain scenes feel comforting while others create tension. The sound design deserves another mention because of how effectively it emphasizes physical impact without becoming exaggerated. Every punch inside the ring carries convincing weight, yet the movie avoids turning boxing into unrealistic spectacle. Even breathing, footwork, and small movements become important parts of the audio experience. Those details increase realism while reminding viewers how physically demanding professional boxing truly is. It's easy to underestimate sound design until it's missing, and Creed 3 benefits enormously from its careful attention to those details. Behind the scenes, Michael B. Jordan reportedly worked closely with the stunt coordinators and boxing consultants to ensure that each major fight reflected the emotional relationship between the characters rather than simply showcasing impressive choreography. That philosophy explains why every significant match feels different. The fights aren't interchangeable action scenes. Each one communicates something about the people involved, their emotional state, and what they're trying to prove. That's storytelling through movement instead of dialogue, and it's one of the film's strongest creative achievements. Critics frequently pointed to this emotional focus as one of the movie's greatest strengths. While some acknowledged that certain story beats followed familiar sports drama traditions, many agreed that the performances and direction elevated the material. Michael B. Jordan received widespread praise for making such a confident directing debut, while Jonathan Majors' portrayal of Damian was consistently highlighted as one of the film's most memorable elements. Audiences responded similarly, appreciating that the movie invested as much effort into character relationships as it did into the boxing itself. What ultimately makes Creed 3 stand out isn't that it reinvents the sports genre. Instead, it reminds viewers why character-driven storytelling remains so powerful. Championships eventually become history. Records are eventually broken. New champions always emerge. But the emotional struggles people carry with them often last much longer. By placing those struggles at the center of the story, the film creates something that feels larger than boxing. It becomes a thoughtful look at friendship, responsibility, forgiveness, and the difficult process of making peace with the parts of our past that refuse to disappear. One of the biggest achievements of Creed 3 becomes impossible to ignore. The movie has enough confidence to slow down whenever it needs to. That may not sound like a major accomplishment, but in today's blockbuster landscape, it's actually quite rare. Many modern franchise films are afraid that audiences will lose interest if there isn't constant action on screen. As a result, emotional scenes are often rushed so the next fight or explosion can begin. Creed 3 understands that excitement only has value when viewers are emotionally connected to the people involved. That's why the quieter moments become just as important as everything that happens inside the ring. The film also deserves credit for showing that success doesn't erase insecurity. Adonis has already proven himself to the boxing world countless times. Nobody questions his talent anymore. Nobody doubts his achievements. Yet Damian's arrival immediately shakes his confidence in ways that championship opponents never could. That happens because Damian doesn't threaten Adonis physically at first. He threatens the version of the past that Adonis has spent years trying to live with. The film quietly reminds us that emotional wounds rarely heal simply because life improves. Sometimes they remain hidden until one unexpected encounter brings everything back to the surface. One of the screenplay's strongest qualities is its understanding of long-term friendship. Friendships built during childhood or adolescence carry a unique emotional weight because they're connected to the people we used to be. Even after many years apart, those relationships often feel strangely familiar. At the same time, they're also filled with memories that can be painful to revisit. Creed 3 captures that complicated feeling remarkably well. Every interaction between Adonis and Damian carries traces of affection, disappointment, guilt, admiration, and resentment all at once. Those emotions constantly compete with each other, making their relationship feel much more realistic than a simple rivalry. Jonathan Majors deserves another round of praise because his performance becomes even more layered the deeper the story goes. Damian isn't driven only by anger. He's driven by the belief that life owes him something it never gave him the chance to earn. That's a dangerous mindset because it slowly turns every successful person into a reminder of what he lost. Majors communicates that frustration with incredible subtlety. Even when Damian appears calm, there's always a feeling that years of disappointment are sitting just beneath the surface. His eyes often tell a completely different story than his words, making nearly every conversation feel unpredictable. Michael B. Jordan matches that emotional complexity with a performance built around restraint rather than dramatic outbursts. One of the things Jordan understands extremely well is that guilt often makes people quieter instead of louder. Adonis spends much of the film trying to convince himself that he's moved on, but small moments continue revealing that certain memories still affect him deeply. Jordan never overplays those emotions. Instead, he trusts the audience to notice brief pauses, uncertain expressions, and moments of hesitation. Those subtle choices make Adonis feel like someone carrying years of emotional weight without constantly talking about it. Another aspect worth appreciating is how naturally the movie continues exploring family life. Bianca and Amara aren't included simply to interrupt the boxing storyline. They represent the future Adonis has worked so hard to create. Every difficult decision he makes now carries greater consequences because he's no longer fighting only for himself. That shift changes the emotional stakes dramatically. Earlier in the franchise, Adonis could afford to take reckless risks because he had very little to lose. Now every choice affects the people waiting for him at home. That added responsibility gives the story a maturity that many sports dramas never reach. Tessa Thompson once again delivers a wonderfully grounded performance. Bianca has always been one of the franchise's strongest characters because she isn't written as a passive observer. She understands Adonis well enough to recognize when something is troubling him, even before he says anything. At the same time, she refuses to simply accept every decision he makes. Their marriage feels believable because it's built on honest communication instead of manufactured drama. Hollywood often mistakes constant arguments for emotional realism, but Creed 3 shows that mature relationships are usually based on trust, patience, and difficult conversations rather than endless conflict. The technical side of the film continues supporting these performances beautifully. The production design quietly reflects the emotional differences between characters without ever becoming distracting. Adonis' world feels organized, comfortable, and carefully built through years of discipline. Damian's surroundings often carry a rougher, less polished atmosphere, reflecting the instability that has shaped his life. These visual contrasts help audiences understand each character before a single line of dialogue is spoken. That's the mark of thoughtful filmmaking. Every creative department contributes to storytelling instead of existing purely for decoration. The fight choreography also deserves continued recognition because every exchange feels motivated by character rather than spectacle. Modern action movies sometimes become repetitive because every fight follows the same rhythm. Creed 3 avoids that problem by making each boxing sequence reflect the emotional condition of the fighters involved. Confidence, frustration, determination, fear, and desperation all influence the way punches are thrown and defenses are maintained. Even viewers unfamiliar with boxing strategy can feel those emotional differences because they're expressed physically throughout every match. Another impressive creative decision is how the film handles pacing. At just under 2 hours, the story never feels overloaded with unnecessary subplots. There are opportunities where the screenplay could have introduced additional rivalries, side characters, or distractions, but instead it remains focused on the emotional relationship at its center. That discipline keeps the narrative tight while allowing each important moment enough space to have lasting impact. It also prevents the movie from becoming another overstuffed franchise sequel trying to satisfy too many ideas at once. The music continues playing a subtle but essential role throughout the experience. Joseph Shirley's score rarely tries to overpower scenes emotionally. Instead, it quietly supports the performances already happening on screen. During training sequences, the music gradually builds determination without simply copying the iconic style established by earlier Rocky films. During quieter conversations, the soundtrack often steps back almost completely, allowing silence to become part of the storytelling. That restraint demonstrates a level of confidence that fits the overall tone of the movie perfectly. One behind-the-scenes detail that makes the film even more impressive is the amount of physical preparation required from both leads. Michael B. Jordan and Jonathan Majors reportedly trained for months under professional boxing coaches, following strict conditioning programs designed to make their movements believable from every angle. The training wasn't focused only on appearance. They practiced defensive techniques, footwork, timing, endurance, and ring awareness so experienced boxing fans would recognize authentic habits. That dedication is visible throughout the film because neither actor ever looks uncomfortable inside the ring. The audience response after release confirmed that this more character-driven approach resonated with viewers. Many fans appreciated that Creed 3 wasn't trying to imitate the original Rocky films scene for scene. Instead, it embraced its own identity while still respecting the legacy that came before it. The movie's strong box office performance, earning over $275 million worldwide against an estimated $75 million budget, proved that audiences were ready to follow Adonis Creed into a new chapter without relying on nostalgia alone. Looking back at everything the film has accomplished so far, it's clear that Creed 3 isn't interested in telling another story about becoming the best boxer in the world. It's asking a much more difficult question. What happens when the person you've been trying to outrun for years isn't standing across the ring, but has been living inside your own memories all along? That emotional idea gives the movie its real power, transforming it from an entertaining sports drama into a thoughtful story about identity, accountability, and the complicated process of finally confronting the past instead of hiding from it. One of the reasons Creed 3 continues to stay interesting from beginning to end is because it understands that emotional pressure doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes it builds so gradually that even the characters don't realize how much they're carrying until everything finally reaches a breaking point. That's exactly what happens with Adonis. On the surface, he appears calm, successful, and completely in control of his life. But underneath that confidence is someone who has spent years convincing himself that certain memories belong in the past. Damian's return doesn't create those emotions. It simply forces Adonis to stop avoiding them. That distinction is important because it makes the story feel much more honest than a typical revenge drama. The movie also explores something many people experience but rarely talk about openly. There are moments in life when success can actually make admitting mistakes more difficult. Once someone becomes respected, admired, and viewed as a role model, there's pressure to appear as though everything has always been under control. Adonis has built an image of strength over many years, yet that image makes it even harder for him to acknowledge the guilt he's been carrying. Michael B. Jordan communicates that conflict beautifully. His performance constantly balances confidence with vulnerability, allowing viewers to understand that even champions can struggle with emotions they don't fully understand themselves. Another impressive aspect of the screenplay is how carefully it handles forgiveness. Forgiveness is often treated as something simple in movies, where one emotional conversation magically solves years of pain. Creed 3 wisely avoids that shortcut. Instead, it presents forgiveness as a complicated process that requires honesty, accountability, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Neither Adonis nor Damian can move forward until they stop pretending that the past no longer matters. That's a much more mature approach than audiences usually see in sports films, and it gives the emotional journey genuine weight. Jonathan Majors continues delivering an unforgettable performance because Damian never becomes a one-dimensional antagonist. There are moments where his confidence almost feels inspiring, followed almost immediately by moments that reveal just how deeply damaged he is emotionally. The most effective villains are usually the ones who believe they're fighting for something meaningful rather than simply causing destruction. Damian genuinely believes life robbed him of opportunities he deserved, and that belief drives almost every decision he makes. Even when audiences disagree with his actions, they can still understand the emotional logic behind them. That complexity keeps the conflict engaging throughout the entire film. Michael B. Jordan deserves enormous credit for trusting his audience enough to avoid unnecessary exposition. There are several emotional moments where the movie refuses to explain exactly what viewers should feel. Instead, it relies on performances, facial expressions, and carefully framed shots to communicate meaning. That's surprisingly rare in blockbuster filmmaking today, where many movies constantly explain their themes through dialogue. Jordan understands that audiences enjoy discovering emotions for themselves. By resisting the urge to over-explain everything, he allows viewers to become emotionally involved in a much more personal way. The chemistry between Jordan and Majors is another reason the film works so well. Neither actor tries to overpower the other. Instead, they constantly adjust their performances depending on the emotional tone of each scene. Sometimes the conversations feel almost friendly, reminding viewers of the history these two characters once shared. Other moments become intensely uncomfortable without anyone raising their voice. That emotional unpredictability keeps every interaction fresh because viewers never know exactly where the conversation is going to end. Tessa Thompson once again brings balance whenever the story becomes emotionally heavy. Bianca isn't simply there to comfort Adonis whenever he struggles. She represents the life he's trying to protect and the future he's trying to preserve. Thompson gives the character remarkable emotional maturity, making every conversation feel genuine rather than scripted. One thing that stands out is how naturally Bianca communicates concern. She doesn't immediately judge Adonis or demand dramatic explanations. Instead, she listens, questions, and encourages him to face realities he would rather avoid. That's the kind of emotional support real relationships often provide, and the film portrays it with refreshing honesty. Amara's presence continues adding warmth without distracting from the central conflict. Her relationship with both parents feels authentic because the movie doesn't constantly use her for sentimental moments. Instead, everyday family interactions quietly remind viewers that Adonis now has responsibilities far beyond boxing. Those scenes also reinforce one of the film's central ideas. The decisions adults make don't affect only themselves. They shape the lives of the next generation as well. That's another reason Adonis approaches every challenge differently than he did earlier in the franchise. He's no longer fighting solely for personal ambition. From a technical perspective, the cinematography remains consistently strong. Kramer Morgenthau understands how to use camera movement to reflect emotional tension rather than simply creating stylish images. During quieter conversations, the camera often remains steady, allowing performances to dominate the scene. During boxing sequences, movement becomes more energetic, placing viewers directly inside the emotional intensity of each exchange. This careful contrast helps maintain visual variety while ensuring that every stylistic choice serves the story instead of distracting from it. The editing continues playing an equally important role. One of the film's greatest strengths is knowing when to slow down. Many modern action movies seem afraid of silence, but Creed 3 embraces quieter moments whenever they're emotionally necessary. Editors Tyler Nelson and Jessica Backless give conversations enough room to breathe before increasing the pace again. That rhythm allows emotional scenes to resonate instead of feeling like brief pauses between action sequences. It's a subtle achievement, but it has a huge impact on how naturally the story unfolds. The production also benefits from excellent sound design. Every boxing match feels physically convincing because punches, movement, breathing, and crowd reactions are carefully balanced. The sound team avoids turning every impact into an exaggerated explosion, choosing realism over spectacle. Just as importantly, quieter scenes often reduce background noise, making conversations feel more intimate. Those choices help audiences stay emotionally connected throughout the film without constantly drawing attention to the technical work behind the scenes. An interesting behind-the-scenes fact is that Michael B. Jordan reportedly encouraged the boxing choreography team to think about every fight as an extension of the characters' personalities. Instead of asking what would simply look impressive, he wanted each exchange to communicate emotional meaning. That philosophy is visible throughout the movie. The fights don't exist only to entertain. They reveal fear, confidence, frustration, determination, and years of unresolved emotion. Every significant movement inside the ring reflects something happening psychologically between the fighters, making the action feel purposeful rather than repetitive. Critically, this creative approach received considerable praise. Reviewers consistently highlighted Jordan's confidence as a first-time director, particularly his willingness to experiment with visual storytelling during the fight sequences. Jonathan Majors' performance was widely recognized as one of the film's strongest elements, while audiences appreciated the emotional maturity that separated Creed 3 from many formulaic sports dramas. Combined with its worldwide box office success of more than $275 million, the movie proved that thoughtful character development could still attract large audiences alongside exciting action. By now, it's clear that Creed 3 is telling a story that reaches far beyond championship belts. It's about accepting that no amount of success can erase unresolved pain, and no amount of physical strength can replace emotional honesty. The film quietly suggests that the hardest battles are rarely fought under bright arena lights. More often, they're fought in private, where pride, regret, and forgiveness collide in ways no audience can ever fully see. That emotional truth gives the movie a lasting impact, ensuring it's remembered for much more than the boxing itself. One of the qualities that gives Creed 3 long-term value is that it doesn't depend entirely on surprise. Even if someone already knows the broad outline of the story, the movie remains enjoyable because the emotional journey matters far more than the plot itself. That's often the difference between a film people watch once and a film they return to years later. The suspense doesn't come only from wondering who wins. It comes from wondering whether these characters can overcome the emotional damage that has shaped their lives for so long. That kind of storytelling usually ages much better than movies built entirely around unexpected twists. The screenplay also deserves recognition for exploring the idea of identity. Throughout the Creed series, Adonis has spent years trying to answer one difficult question. Is he simply the son of Apollo Creed, or is he capable of creating his own legacy? Earlier films focused heavily on proving himself inside the boxing world. Creed 3 approaches that same question from a different angle. Now that Adonis has already established his reputation, he has to decide what kind of man he wants to be outside the ring. That's a much deeper challenge because championships eventually become history, but personal character continues shaping every decision a person makes long after their athletic career ends. Michael B. Jordan handles that transition remarkably well. One of the strongest aspects of his performance is how naturally he portrays maturity. Adonis still has the confidence and competitive spirit that made him successful, but he also carries the responsibilities of adulthood. His priorities have changed. Family now matters as much as boxing, and leadership matters as much as personal achievement. Jordan never forces those changes through dramatic speeches. Instead, they appear gradually through everyday conversations, thoughtful reactions, and the way Adonis approaches difficult situations. It's a subtle evolution that makes the character feel like someone audiences have genuinely watched grow over several films. Jonathan Majors continues matching that performance with extraordinary emotional complexity. Damian remains one of the franchise's most fascinating opponents because his greatest battle isn't with Adonis alone. It's with the version of himself he believes life should have allowed him to become. Every success Adonis enjoys becomes another reminder of everything Damian feels he lost. That emotional comparison slowly consumes him, creating a character driven by disappointment as much as ambition. Majors captures that mixture brilliantly. Even in moments where Damian appears completely confident, there are flashes of sadness that make him unexpectedly sympathetic. Another element worth appreciating is how carefully the movie avoids reducing everything to physical conflict. The boxing matches are important, but the emotional conversations carry equal significance. In many ways, the discussions between characters reveal more about their personalities than the fights themselves. That's because words often expose fears that physical strength cannot hide. The screenplay understands that emotional honesty can be just as dramatic as any championship bout, and that balance keeps the story feeling fresh throughout its running time. The relationship between Adonis and Bianca continues standing out as one of the healthiest portrayals of marriage in a major Hollywood franchise. Their partnership isn't built on perfect agreement. Instead, it's built on mutual respect. Bianca isn't afraid to question Adonis whenever she believes he's making mistakes, but she never stops supporting him as a person. Tessa Thompson plays those moments with remarkable sincerity. Her performance reminds audiences that emotional support isn't about agreeing with someone all the time. Sometimes it's about encouraging them to confront difficult truths they'd rather avoid. Amara's role also becomes increasingly meaningful because she quietly represents hope for the future. The movie never places unnecessary emotional pressure on her character, yet her presence constantly reminds viewers that Adonis' decisions affect more than his own life. One thoughtful detail that deserves recognition is how naturally sign language is integrated into family conversations. Rather than turning it into a dramatic plot point, the film treats it as an ordinary part of everyday life. That authenticity makes the Creed family feel genuine and strengthens the emotional realism of the entire story. From a directing standpoint, Jordan continues showing impressive confidence. One decision that stands out is his refusal to imitate Ryan Coogler's style from the first Creed. It would have been easy to copy what already worked, but Jordan instead develops his own visual identity. The influence of anime-inspired framing, slower emotional pacing, and psychologically driven fight choreography gives Creed 3 a personality that feels distinct while still fitting naturally within the franchise. That's a difficult balance for any first-time director, yet Jordan handles it with surprising assurance. The production design remains consistently strong throughout the film. Every environment reflects the stage of life each character occupies. Adonis' surroundings communicate discipline, stability, and years of hard-earned success. Damian's world feels far less settled, reinforcing the emotional instability that defines much of his journey. None of these visual details demand attention, but together they create a believable world that supports the performances without distracting from them. Good production design often works invisibly, and that's exactly what happens here. The boxing sequences deserve additional praise because they never become repetitive. Each major fight carries its own emotional purpose, and the choreography reflects that difference. Some moments emphasize patience and control, while others reveal frustration, desperation, or determination. Michael B. Jordan reportedly worked closely with experienced boxing consultants to ensure that every exchange felt authentic while still communicating character. That preparation pays off because the action never feels disconnected from the emotional story. Every punch has meaning beyond simply scoring points. The score by Joseph Shirley continues complementing that approach beautifully. Rather than overwhelming viewers with constant orchestral intensity, the music quietly supports the emotional rhythm of each scene. Familiar influences from the Rocky franchise appear occasionally, but the soundtrack mostly establishes its own identity. That decision mirrors the movie itself. It respects its history without allowing nostalgia to dominate the experience. The music understands when to step forward and when to disappear completely, allowing performances to remain the emotional focus. One fascinating behind-the-scenes detail is that the cast spent significant time rehearsing dramatic scenes before filming, not just the boxing choreography. Michael B. Jordan wanted emotional relationships to feel as convincing as the physical confrontations, so rehearsals focused heavily on character dynamics and natural conversation. That preparation is noticeable throughout the film because interactions rarely feel overly scripted. Even emotionally charged discussions have a relaxed quality that makes the dialogue sound closer to real life than polished movie speeches. The audience response after release confirmed that this character-focused approach connected with viewers. CinemaScore audiences awarded the film an A-, while many fans praised the emotional rivalry between Adonis and Damian as one of the strongest elements in the entire franchise. Critics also recognized Jordan's directing debut as an impressive achievement, with particular praise directed toward the performances and the fresh visual style. Combined with a worldwide box office total exceeding $275 million, the movie demonstrated that audiences still appreciate stories built on strong characters rather than spectacle alone. Looking back over everything the film accomplishes, it's remarkable how naturally it expands the Creed series beyond its original foundations. Instead of relying solely on the legacy of Apollo Creed or Rocky Balboa, it establishes Adonis as a fully independent character capable of carrying the franchise into its next chapter. More importantly, it reminds viewers that true victory isn't always measured by titles, trophies, or public recognition. Sometimes the greatest achievement is finding the courage to face the parts of yourself you've spent years trying to leave behind. That emotional honesty is what ultimately gives Creed 3 its lasting power and ensures it stands confidently among the strongest entries in the entire Rocky universe. It becomes obvious that the movie isn't trying to redefine the sports genre through an overly complicated story. Instead, it succeeds because it understands something much more important. Great sports dramas have never been about sports alone. Whether you look at Rocky, Raging Bull, Warrior, or even The Fighter, the competition inside the ring has always been a reflection of something happening inside the characters themselves. Creed 3 follows that tradition beautifully. Boxing is simply the language these characters use to express emotions they've struggled to put into words for years. One of the film's biggest strengths is its emotional honesty. Many blockbuster movies are afraid to let their heroes appear vulnerable because they worry audiences will see that as weakness. Michael B. Jordan takes the opposite approach. He understands that vulnerability often makes a character stronger, not weaker. Adonis has already proven countless times that he can handle physical pain. That's no longer interesting. What makes him compelling here is watching someone who appears successful in every possible way still struggle with guilt, responsibility, and unresolved memories. Those emotional battles make him feel like a real person instead of an untouchable action hero. Another thing the screenplay handles extremely well is the idea of accountability. Modern films sometimes confuse accountability with punishment, but Creed 3 separates the two. The story isn't interested in humiliating its characters for mistakes they made years ago. Instead, it asks whether people are willing to accept responsibility for the consequences of those choices. That's a much more mature perspective because real life rarely offers simple solutions. Some mistakes can never be completely erased. The best people can do is acknowledge them honestly and try to become better moving forward. That message quietly runs beneath almost every major relationship in the movie. Jonathan Majors continues proving why Damian is such a memorable character. What makes him fascinating isn't simply his physical ability or determination. It's the emotional contradiction at the center of his personality. On one hand, he genuinely believes he deserves another opportunity to chase his dreams. On the other, his growing bitterness slowly begins influencing every decision he makes. Those two emotions constantly fight each other throughout the film. Majors captures that conflict with incredible precision. There are moments where audiences genuinely want Damian to succeed, followed almost immediately by moments that remind them how dangerous unchecked resentment can become. Michael B. Jordan deserves praise not only as an actor but also for the confidence he shows as a filmmaker. Directing a movie while also carrying the emotional weight of the lead role could easily have resulted in uneven performances or inconsistent storytelling. Instead, Jordan manages both responsibilities remarkably well. One reason is that he never tries to make every scene feel enormous. He understands that emotional rhythm matters. Some moments are intentionally quiet because they need to be. Others gradually build tension before finally reaching emotional release. That careful pacing demonstrates impressive control for a first-time director working on a major studio production. The supporting cast also continues strengthening the film without competing for attention. Wood Harris brings wisdom and calm authority whenever Duke appears on screen. His character understands boxing better than almost anyone, but he also recognizes that some problems can't be solved through training alone. Phylicia Rashad, returning as Marion Creed, continues giving the franchise emotional continuity. Even with limited screen time, she reminds audiences how much history this family carries. Rashad has always possessed the ability to communicate warmth and strength simultaneously, and that quality remains just as effective here. Tessa Thompson once again delivers one of the movie's most natural performances. Bianca has evolved considerably since the first Creed, and this installment continues respecting that growth. She isn't defined by Adonis' career, nor is she reduced to simply reacting to his choices. Instead, she's portrayed as an equal partner whose perspective often brings clarity whenever Adonis becomes emotionally overwhelmed. Their relationship works because it feels built on years of shared experiences rather than screenplay convenience. Small interactions between them often reveal more about their marriage than lengthy emotional speeches ever could. Visually, Creed 3 remains consistently impressive. Kramer Morgenthau's cinematography avoids making every frame overly polished or artificial. Instead, the lighting and composition support the emotional tone of each scene. Warm colors dominate family moments, creating a feeling of security and comfort. Cooler tones and stronger contrasts often appear whenever Damian enters the story, subtly reflecting the emotional tension surrounding his presence. These choices aren't distracting because they're woven naturally into the film's visual language. It's thoughtful cinematography serving storytelling rather than existing purely for style. The editing deserves additional recognition because it consistently maintains emotional momentum without rushing important scenes. Editors Tyler Nelson and Jessica Backless clearly understood that audiences needed time to absorb the emotional consequences of major conversations before moving toward the next dramatic moment. This patient rhythm allows performances to leave lasting impressions instead of disappearing beneath constant action. Then, when boxing sequences arrive, the pacing naturally becomes more energetic without sacrificing clarity. Every punch, defensive movement, and shift in momentum remains easy to follow, making the action satisfying without becoming chaotic. Another area where the movie excels is sound design. It's surprisingly easy to overlook good audio because audiences usually notice it only when something feels wrong. Here, everything from the sounds of gloves striking during training to the atmosphere inside packed arenas contributes to the realism of the experience. Even quieter moments benefit from careful audio mixing. Background noise is often reduced during emotionally important conversations, allowing viewers to focus entirely on the performances. These technical details may seem small individually, but together they greatly enhance immersion. One fascinating production fact involves Michael B. Jordan's preparation as a director. Before filming began, he reportedly spent significant time studying not only previous Rocky and Creed films but also the directing styles of filmmakers he admired. Rather than simply copying those influences, he focused on understanding why certain emotional moments worked so effectively. That preparation becomes visible throughout Creed 3. The movie feels made by someone who genuinely respects cinema instead of someone merely completing another franchise installment. The critical response reflected that effort. Reviewers consistently praised Jordan's confidence behind the camera, with many expressing surprise that this was his first feature as a director. Jonathan Majors also received widespread acclaim, with numerous critics calling Damian one of the strongest opponents the franchise has introduced in decades. While some reviewers noted that certain story elements followed familiar sports drama traditions, the overwhelming consensus was that the performances and emotional storytelling elevated the material beyond its familiar structure. Commercially, the film exceeded expectations as well. Produced for an estimated $75 million, it earned more than $275 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing installment in the Creed series. That achievement was especially significant because it was the first film in the Rocky universe without Sylvester Stallone appearing on screen. Many people questioned whether audiences would embrace the franchise without its original icon. The box office answered that question clearly. Viewers were ready to continue following Adonis Creed's journey because the series had successfully established its own identity. Perhaps the greatest compliment that can be given to Creed 3 is that it no longer feels like a franchise searching for its purpose. Earlier films naturally carried the responsibility of honoring Rocky's legacy while introducing a new generation. This movie finally steps beyond that shadow. It respects everything that came before it, but it no longer depends on nostalgia for emotional impact. Instead, it stands confidently on the strength of its own characters, performances, and storytelling. That's a difficult transition for any long-running series, and Creed 3 handles it with surprising confidence, proving that sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to have the courage to build a new one. One aspect of Creed 3 that becomes even more impressive after thinking about it for a while is how carefully it balances emotion with entertainment. A lot of sports dramas lean too heavily in one direction. Some focus almost entirely on emotional conversations and forget that audiences still want exciting competition. Others become so obsessed with action that the characters stop feeling like real people. This film manages to stay comfortably between those two extremes. Every emotional moment has a purpose, and every boxing sequence pushes the characters forward instead of existing only to impress the audience. That balance is one of the biggest reasons the movie remains engaging from beginning to end. The more you watch Michael B. Jordan's performance, the more small details begin to stand out. He rarely chooses the obvious emotional reaction. There are moments where another actor might have delivered a dramatic speech or an emotional breakdown, but Jordan often does the opposite. He allows silence to communicate what the character is feeling. A brief pause before answering a question, avoiding eye contact for just a second, or taking an extra moment before making a decision tells the audience far more than pages of dialogue ever could. Those choices make Adonis feel like someone genuinely carrying emotional weight instead of simply acting emotional because the script demands it. That quiet approach also fits the stage of life Adonis has reached. He's no longer the young fighter trying to prove everyone wrong. He's older, more experienced, and more thoughtful. Experience often changes the way people express themselves. Younger versions of ourselves tend to react immediately, while maturity usually brings reflection before action. Jordan captures that evolution beautifully. Even during moments of frustration, Adonis tries to remain in control because he understands the consequences of every decision far better than he once did. It's subtle character growth that rewards viewers who have followed the series from the beginning. Jonathan Majors continues giving Damian remarkable emotional complexity. One reason his performance works so well is because he never behaves like someone who thinks he's the villain. From Damian's perspective, he's simply trying to reclaim the life he believes was taken from him. That mindset makes him much more believable than a typical movie antagonist. Every action, even the questionable ones, comes from years of disappointment and missed opportunities. Majors understands that people rarely see themselves as evil. They justify their choices through their own experiences, and he communicates that psychology with extraordinary confidence. The chemistry between Jordan and Majors deserves enormous praise because it creates the emotional heartbeat of the film. Neither actor dominates the relationship. Instead, they constantly react to each other's energy. During calmer conversations, there's still a feeling that years of unfinished history are sitting quietly between them. Then, when emotions begin rising, the performances naturally become more intense without feeling exaggerated. That progression feels earned because the film spends enough time building their shared history before asking the audience to fully invest in their conflict. The screenplay also deserves recognition for refusing to rely on coincidence. Too many movies force characters into dramatic situations simply because the plot requires it. Creed 3 generally avoids that problem. The conflict grows naturally from decisions people make and the emotional consequences of those decisions. Every major development feels connected to something that came before it. That sense of cause and effect makes the story feel believable even when emotions become extremely intense. It's another example of careful writing that doesn't always receive the attention it deserves. Family continues serving as the emotional foundation of the movie. Bianca and Amara constantly remind viewers what Adonis has spent years building. His motivation is no longer based only on personal ambition. Every decision now affects the people closest to him. That added responsibility changes the emotional meaning of every challenge he faces. Earlier in his career, Adonis could afford to think mainly about himself. Now every risk carries consequences for an entire family. That shift gives the character much greater emotional depth and reflects how priorities naturally change with age. Tessa Thompson remains one of the film's quiet strengths. Bianca never feels like a supporting character waiting for the story to need her. She has her own emotional perspective, and the screenplay consistently respects her intelligence. Thompson plays Bianca with warmth, patience, and honesty, making every conversation feel genuine. One thing the movie does particularly well is showing that emotional support doesn't always mean providing comfort. Sometimes supporting someone means encouraging them to face difficult truths they've spent years avoiding. Bianca understands that better than anyone else in Adonis' life. The technical craftsmanship remains consistently strong as well. Production designer Jamin Asa creates environments that feel authentic instead of overly glamorous. The gyms look like places where athletes genuinely spend countless hours training. The family home reflects years of success without becoming unnecessarily extravagant. Even small background details contribute to the feeling that these characters exist in a believable world beyond the story we're watching. That attention to realism helps ground the emotional drama throughout the film. The costume design quietly reinforces those ideas. Adonis dresses with the confidence of someone who has achieved success but still values discipline. Bianca's wardrobe reflects her artistic personality while remaining practical and believable. Damian's appearance continues communicating the difficult path his life has taken. None of these visual choices feel exaggerated because they're designed to support character rather than attract attention. It's thoughtful work that blends naturally into the overall production. One area that deserves special appreciation is the film's approach to action. Modern audiences have become accustomed to increasingly elaborate fight scenes filled with impossible stunts and overwhelming visual effects. Creed 3 chooses a different direction. The boxing remains exciting because it's emotionally meaningful rather than physically outrageous. Every exchange inside the ring reflects something happening psychologically between the fighters. Anger, regret, pride, determination, and frustration all become visible through movement instead of dialogue. That approach keeps the action engaging while ensuring it never overshadows the characters. Another interesting behind-the-scenes detail is the amount of preparation Michael B. Jordan invested before stepping behind the camera. He reportedly shadowed experienced directors on previous projects, asking questions about camera placement, pacing, communication with actors, and visual storytelling long before making his directing debut. That willingness to learn is reflected throughout Creed 3. The movie never feels like someone experimenting without preparation. Instead, it feels like the work of someone who patiently developed the necessary skills before taking on such a significant responsibility. The audience reaction after release further confirmed that careful preparation paid off. Many longtime fans admitted they were initially uncertain about a Rocky universe without Sylvester Stallone appearing on screen. After seeing the finished film, however, much of that skepticism disappeared. Viewers praised the emotional maturity of the story, the chemistry between the two leads, and Jordan's confident directing style. The movie's worldwide box office of more than $275 million demonstrated that audiences were ready to embrace this new era of the franchise on its own terms. Looking at Creed 3 as a whole, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The movie isn't trying to convince viewers that physical strength solves every problem. In fact, it repeatedly suggests the opposite. The hardest battles are often internal, where pride, regret, fear, and forgiveness collide in ways no audience can fully witness. Boxing simply gives those invisible struggles a physical form. That's what makes the film resonate beyond sports fans. Underneath the gloves, championship belts, and packed arenas is a deeply human story about accepting responsibility, confronting painful memories, and discovering that true courage sometimes begins only after the final bell has stopped ringing. As Creed 3 moves toward its final stretch, one thing becomes more obvious than ever. This isn't a movie that's interested in giving simple answers. It understands that life rarely offers clean endings where every problem disappears after one important decision. Instead, it presents growth as something complicated, uncomfortable, and ongoing. That approach makes the film feel surprisingly honest because real people don't suddenly become different overnight. They change gradually, often through difficult experiences that force them to confront parts of themselves they would rather ignore. That's exactly the emotional journey Adonis finds himself facing, and it's one of the reasons the movie feels more mature than many recent sports dramas. The screenplay also deserves praise for respecting the audience's intelligence. It never feels desperate to explain every emotional detail through dialogue. Instead, many important ideas are communicated through behavior. The way characters react, hesitate, or choose not to respond often says more than lengthy conversations ever could. This kind of writing requires confidence because it trusts viewers to notice subtle emotional shifts on their own. Michael B. Jordan clearly embraces that philosophy as a director, allowing scenes to breathe naturally instead of forcing every emotion into words. One of the strongest themes running throughout the film is the idea that every choice leaves a lasting impact. Success doesn't erase the consequences of earlier decisions, and time doesn't automatically heal emotional wounds. Adonis has spent years building a life he can be proud of, but Damian's return reminds him that unfinished chapters have a way of demanding attention eventually. That's something many viewers can relate to. Almost everyone carries memories they wish they had handled differently. Creed 3 doesn't suggest those regrets can simply disappear. Instead, it argues that people become stronger by facing them honestly rather than pretending they never existed. Michael B. Jordan continues delivering one of the most controlled performances of his career. Earlier in the Creed series, Adonis often reacted with youthful emotion and impulsive confidence. Here, Jordan portrays someone who has learned patience through experience. That doesn't mean the character has become emotionally perfect. In fact, his greatest challenge is learning that maturity doesn't mean suppressing difficult feelings forever. There are moments where Jordan communicates enormous emotional conflict without saying a single word. A brief pause, a distant look, or a subtle change in expression reveals everything audiences need to understand. Those quiet acting choices give the performance remarkable authenticity. Jonathan Majors remains equally compelling throughout the film. Damian never loses the emotional complexity that makes him such an interesting opponent. He's driven by ambition, but underneath that ambition is years of disappointment that continue influencing every decision he makes. The movie wisely avoids reducing him to a traditional villain because people shaped by pain are rarely that simple. Majors consistently reminds audiences that Damian wasn't born angry. His bitterness developed over time, growing stronger every year he spent watching life move forward without him. That emotional foundation makes his actions understandable, even when they're difficult to support. Another area where the film succeeds is its exploration of legacy. The Rocky franchise has always been connected to the idea of carrying something larger than yourself. Earlier films focused heavily on Apollo Creed and Rocky Balboa. Creed 3 shifts that conversation toward Adonis himself. Rather than constantly asking whether he can live up to someone else's reputation, the movie begins asking what kind of legacy he wants to leave behind for his own family and for the next generation of fighters. That's an important evolution because it finally allows Adonis to step completely into his own identity instead of remaining defined by the achievements of those who came before him. The supporting cast continues strengthening that emotional foundation. Tessa Thompson once again brings warmth and intelligence to Bianca. One thing that stands out throughout the movie is how naturally she and Jordan interact. Their conversations never feel overly rehearsed or artificially dramatic. Instead, they resemble the everyday communication of two people who genuinely know one another after years of marriage. Small moments of encouragement, concern, disagreement, and understanding make their relationship one of the most believable aspects of the film. Wood Harris also continues providing steady emotional support as Duke. His character understands that experience sometimes means recognizing problems before anyone else does. Harris never tries to steal scenes through dramatic performances. Instead, he relies on calm confidence, making Duke feel like someone who has earned wisdom through decades inside the boxing world. His presence quietly reinforces one of the movie's central ideas: true mentorship isn't only about teaching technique. It's about helping people navigate the emotional challenges that success often brings. From a technical standpoint, Creed 3 remains consistently polished. The cinematography continues balancing realism with artistic expression. Kramer Morgenthau's camera rarely feels flashy simply for the sake of style. Every visual decision serves the emotional tone of the story. Close-up shots emphasize personal conflict, while wider compositions remind viewers of the larger world surrounding these characters. The lighting remains equally thoughtful, using warm and cool tones to subtly reflect shifting emotional states without drawing unnecessary attention to itself. The editing also deserves continued recognition. One of the movie's greatest technical achievements is its ability to maintain emotional momentum without rushing important scenes. Editors Tyler Nelson and Jessica Beckless understand that viewers need time to process significant emotional moments before moving into the next stage of the story. That patience prevents the narrative from feeling overcrowded, allowing each relationship enough space to develop naturally. Even during training and boxing sequences, the editing remains clear and purposeful, ensuring audiences always understand the emotional stakes behind the action. Another element that deserves praise is the film's practical approach to its boxing scenes. Unlike many modern action films that depend heavily on computer-generated effects, Creed 3 relies primarily on carefully choreographed performances, realistic stunt work, and convincing physical preparation from its actors. Michael B. Jordan and Jonathan Majors spent months training with professional coaches, learning authentic boxing techniques instead of simply looking athletic on camera. That preparation gives every exchange inside the ring a sense of realism that audiences can immediately recognize. One fascinating behind-the-scenes fact is that Jordan frequently encouraged cast members to contribute ideas during rehearsals if they believed certain conversations could sound more natural. That collaborative environment helped many scenes avoid the overly polished dialogue often found in blockbuster filmmaking. As a result, the interactions between characters feel spontaneous, relaxed, and emotionally believable. It's another example of Jordan approaching directing with the mindset of an actor who understands how important authentic performances are to successful storytelling. The film's reception also reflects how well those creative choices connected with audiences. Critics praised its emotional maturity, Jordan's confident directing debut, and Jonathan Majors' unforgettable performance. Many reviewers acknowledged that while the overall structure remained familiar to sports drama fans, the emotional depth, strong acting, and fresh visual style helped the movie stand apart from similar entries in the genre. Combined with its worldwide box office success of more than $275 million, Creed 3 proved that audiences still appreciate stories built around compelling characters rather than relying solely on spectacle. Perhaps the most satisfying thing about Creed 3 is that it understands the difference between winning and healing. Winning can happen in a single night. Healing often takes years. The film never pretends those two ideas are the same. Instead, it quietly reminds viewers that some of life's most meaningful victories happen far away from cheering crowds and championship belts. They happen when people finally find the courage to accept their past, take responsibility for their choices, and move toward the future with greater honesty than before. That's the emotional message that gives Creed 3 its lasting strength and ensures it remains memorable long after the credits finish rolling. Looking back at Creed 3 as a complete experience, it's easy to understand why so many people consider it one of the strongest entries in the entire Rocky and Creed franchise. It doesn't succeed because it completely reinvents sports movies. It succeeds because it understands what has always made this series special. Beneath every championship fight has always been a deeply personal story about ordinary people trying to overcome extraordinary emotional struggles. This film continues that tradition while confidently stepping into its own identity. Rather than living in the shadow of Rocky Balboa, it proves that Adonis Creed has finally become a character capable of carrying this universe on his own. Michael B. Jordan deserves enormous credit for taking such a significant creative risk. Directing a major Hollywood franchise for the first time while also delivering the lead performance could easily have gone wrong. Instead, he shows remarkable confidence behind the camera. His direction never feels like someone trying too hard to impress the audience with flashy filmmaking. Instead, every creative decision feels motivated by character and emotion. Whether it's the intimate cinematography, the carefully paced conversations, or the emotionally charged boxing sequences, Jordan consistently keeps the focus on the people rather than the spectacle. That's an impressive achievement for any director, especially one making a debut on a project of this scale. His performance as Adonis Creed is equally strong. What makes it memorable isn't the physical transformation or the boxing scenes, although both are excellent. It's the emotional maturity he brings to the character. Adonis no longer feels like someone trying to prove his worth. Instead, he's a man learning that success doesn't erase the mistakes or regrets that shaped him. Jordan portrays that internal struggle with remarkable restraint, allowing small expressions and quiet moments to communicate emotions that many actors would try to explain through dramatic speeches. That subtle approach makes the character feel genuine and relatable. Jonathan Majors also deserves tremendous praise for his work as Damian Anderson. Without a convincing opponent, Creed 3 would never have carried the same emotional weight. Damian isn't simply another rival standing across the ring. He's a reminder of a past that Adonis believed he had left behind. Majors brings enough humanity to the role that audiences can understand his pain even when they disagree with his choices. That's what separates memorable movie opponents from forgettable ones. They're driven by understandable emotions rather than simple hatred. Damian's story becomes just as emotionally compelling as Adonis' journey, and that balance strengthens the entire film. The supporting cast also plays an important role in making the story feel grounded. Tessa Thompson continues giving Bianca warmth, intelligence, and emotional honesty, while Wood Harris and Phylicia Rashad provide stability and wisdom whenever they appear. None of these characters feel unnecessary. Each one contributes something meaningful to Adonis' journey, helping the emotional world of the movie feel complete. From a technical standpoint, the film is consistently impressive. The cinematography creates an intimate atmosphere, the editing maintains a smooth rhythm, the sound design makes every fight feel authentic, and Joseph Shirley's score supports emotional moments without overwhelming them. The production design, costume work, and realistic boxing choreography all combine to create a believable world that never feels artificial. Even the anime-inspired visual touches introduced by Michael B. Jordan bring something fresh without losing the grounded feeling that has always defined this franchise. Financially, the movie was another major success. Made with a production budget of around $75 million, it earned more than $275 million worldwide, becoming the highest-grossing film in the Creed series. Critics largely praised Michael B. Jordan's confident directing debut and Jonathan Majors' outstanding performance, while audiences appreciated the emotional storytelling that went beyond traditional sports movie formulas. Those reactions show that viewers were ready for the franchise to move forward without depending entirely on Rocky Balboa's presence. Of course, no movie is perfect. Some viewers may feel that certain story beats follow familiar sports drama traditions, and a few supporting characters could have been explored in greater depth. The overall narrative isn't filled with shocking surprises, especially for people who have watched many boxing films. But those small issues never outweigh the film's strengths because the emotional performances remain so convincing. The story may feel familiar at times, yet the honesty with which it's told keeps it engaging from beginning to end. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Creed 3 is that it reminds audiences that the hardest battles aren't always physical. It's easy to train muscles, improve technique, and prepare for an opponent standing across the ring. It's much harder to confront guilt, accept responsibility, and make peace with painful memories that have been shaping your decisions for years. That's the emotional lesson at the heart of the film, and it's what gives the story lasting value long after the final fight is over. If you're looking only for non-stop boxing action, you'll certainly find exciting moments here. But if you want a sports drama that also explores friendship, regret, forgiveness, family, and personal growth, Creed 3 delivers much more than expected. It's a film that respects the legacy of the Rocky universe while confidently creating its own path, proving that Adonis Creed is no longer carrying someone else's story. He's finally leading his own. Overall, Creed 3 is a thoughtful, emotional, and beautifully made sports drama that combines strong performances, confident direction, meaningful themes, and exciting boxing into one satisfying experience. It may not be the flashiest movie in the franchise, but it might be one of its most personal. That's exactly why it continues to connect with audiences and why it deserves its place among the best modern boxing films. If I had to rate it, I'd give Creed 3 an 8.8 out of 10. It's a movie that's well worth watching whether you're a longtime Rocky fan or someone discovering this world for the first time. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this review and found it helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss future movie reviews and facts. And I'd really love to hear your opinion. Did Creed 3 live up to your expectations, or do you still think the earlier Creed movies were stronger? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next review.